Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. So great to see so many people here. It's an interesting topic, this one, very relevant to anyone in the RTO space. So really impressed with the turnout. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me so generously. As I always say, these are, even though it's a free session, you're still investing your hard-earned time on a Friday, and that means a lot. So thanks for coming along. Hope we can make it worth it for you. Just give me a sec, we'll kick it off. Yeah, my name's Paul Pellier. I've been in the vet sector probably about 18 years now, and I was looking at some interesting things earlier in where all this stuff came from, training and assessment strategies. And yeah, things have evolved a fair bit, but some things are still the same as well. So today's session is all about developing training and assessment strategies, particularly for registered training organisations, RTOs in the vocational education and training sector. I'll be drawing on a fair bit of experience over the years in developing these documents, and also drawing on the really generous input of some other vet professionals as well who shared their experiences with me too. I am by myself today, so sometimes I bring in my colleagues to help out with the chat. So it is just me. So I'll check the chat periodically. Please ask your questions directly through there. And if you if I miss your question, I'm really sorry. Please don't hesitate to reach out afterwards if you really had a burning question that I didn't quite address. But I'll do my best to get through everything without breaking up the continuity of the session. There are quite a lot of people here today. Okay, let's get started. Excellior acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I'm coming to you today from beautiful Gumbaynggirr country. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participants here today. We acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's spirit, imagination and rich history of teaching and learning that's been happening on this land for many thousands of years. I want to start also with a disclaimer that today's session is not compliance advice. So I don't want to hear from anybody who goes through an audit with a performance assessment with ASQA and says, hey, Paul Pellier told me to do it this way, and we were deemed not compliant. The thing that's really important to note with these kind of things with training and assessment strategies is they are very, very contextual, and they need to be developed for the organisation and the context that they're being used in. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And as we'll learn throughout the session, it's only a little bit about the actual document. I mean, today's session is all about what we put in that document. But when it comes to the regulatory side of things and what the Australian Skills Quality Authority want, they're really into what you're actually doing. They're into your practices. So we'll talk about that more. But yeah, this is just sharing my experience and that of others as well. And that's all I've got to offer, really. And I hope that it's useful. I mean, I'm certainly talking to you from quite a vast range of experiences. I've been through plenty of audits. I've written plenty of training and assessment strategies. So hopefully it's useful, but you really need to think about your own situation and how this applies. So it definitely is not compliance or legal advice or RTO consulting or anything like that. This screenshot, I don't know if this is familiar to anyone, it's probably going back a few years now. I'm not a huge fan of the food from McDonald's, but this is from the movie called The Founder, which was about when McDonald's was basically when it rose to popularity. And this is the scene. I really love this scene in the movie where the guy, Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, basically gets on the basketball court with a bunch of chalk, and they plot out their patented speedy system for how they're going to turn out however many burgers in such a short period of time. And they lay it all out on a basketball court with chalk, and they get all their mates together and they all practice, you know, how the system will work. And I really love this because it actually shows, you know, a type of strategy. I know Macca's is not really training and assessment strategies, but it really shows how much effort went into planning out a system. And I think that's what we need to do with our training and assessment strategies, is actually take the time to really think about not just the document side of things, but what we're doing with it. So I thought I'd start with that. And now we can talk about what an actual training and assessment strategy is, or a TAS. So I guess my definition of it is that it documents the strategic plan for how a course is delivered and assessed at a registered training organisation for a specific cohort of students. Now, let's break that down a little bit more. We'll look at unpack the terminology a little bit. So, I mean, you know, it's all in the name, training and assessment strategy. But what do those things mean? Well, training, that's how we help students develop the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to meet the standard in a unit of competency. Assessment is how we formally measure the quality of the training, basically, of whether the students actually learnt the knowledge, skills, and attitude in accordance with a unit of competency. And then a strategy, I just took this definition from the dictionary, is a plan of action designed to achieve a long-term or overall aim. So in that sense, the training and assessment strategy really is the high-level document. It's the main core strategy that everything else that you do flows from. So if you're developing a lesson plan for a course that you're going to deliver, that lesson plan needs to basically fit in with what the training and assessment strategy says. If you're designing an assessment tool, then that needs to fit in with what the training and assessment strategy says. If you're opening a new training center or rolling out a new set of resources, rolling out a new course, writing a learner guide, writing case studies, all the things that you do as a trainer and assessor or someone working in an RTO needs to flow down from what that overall training and assessment strategy says. I see a lot of action in the chat box, so I'm just going to check and see what's going on here. So yes, there absolutely will be a recording. So the session's being recorded now, and we'll also send the slides. You get a template. I'm going to send you a template and actually link you to a bunch of others, and hopefully that will be useful to you. Everything else looks like just lovely warm greetings from everybody, and lots of familiar names there. This is great. Thank you so much. Right, so we'll keep moving on. So the thing that I really wanted to point out, I'm going to get into a little bit of compliance stuff here because I know there's some compliance people and RTO managers, so we probably do need to have a little conversation about compliance. The thing that really stands out in the standards for RTOs, which, as you probably know, is the main legislative document that basically we need to comply with as registered training organisations. The standards repeatedly use the phrase training and assessment strategies and practices. And that's really, I've underlined that there and put that the picture from the McDonald's thing. It's really not just about what you put in the document and say you're going to do, but you've got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And I did a fair bit of research on this one. I asked lots, and I'll share with you some of those anecdotes later, but I asked lots of people about what they're doing with their training and assessment strategies, who run RTOs or who work in RTOs, big and small. I asked some compliance consultants as well, who basically do this stuff for a living. And this seems to be, I would say this is the biggest common theme of non-compliances that seems to happen, is that the training and assessment strategy says one thing, but the practice of what the RTO is actually doing and what's happening in the training room and what's happening in the assessments is not really reflecting what the TAS says. I think that's pretty common, and I have a feeling that it's a side effect or a hangover from the early days of the when the AQTF, it was called the Australian Quality Training Framework. Before we had the standards for RTOs as a sort of federal legislative instrument, it was called the Australian Quality Training Framework, which rolled out in 2002. So that's over 20 years old, but they're pretty, if you read, you can still get the standards on the VocEd Plus database and have a look at them. They're still fairly similar. You can see that they've just really evolved from those standards, but they were really document driven. So basically to become an RTO in 2002, you basically, they called them learning and assessment strategies at the time. You basically wrote your document, wrote your policies and procedures, and that was it. And the auditors from the state and territory based regulatory agencies at the time, this was before ASCA, they'd come in, they'd look at your documents and they'd look at your strategies and go, yeah, cool, that's good. Wow, what a good strategy. I'm really impressed. And they wouldn't really spend much time looking at what's actually happening out there in the real world, what's happening in the classroom and what your apprentices are doing on the job and all those sorts of things. So now they're really big on actual practice and probably less concerned with training and assessment strategies. So that's why now it's not really such a big deal what your documents look like, what your template is or what the headings are or anything like that, even though I'll give you a guide for that today. You can take it and use it and do what you want with it. But they're really keen on what's actually happening. So I think that really tells us that it's most important that this document, this training and assessment strategy we create is super functional and user-friendly and reader-friendly. And it's something that's it's talked about a lot in the RTO. I think, and I have to confess, we've fallen into this trap too, is that you write the strategy and it's all shiny and nice and it looks great. And then it kind of gets filed away. And then you kind of look back 12 months later and you go, gee, we've merged on a little bit from what we originally said we'd do. And you have to kind of go back and relook at that TAS and go, oh, gee, we said we'd do that. Are we still doing that? So that's very important. I think the more functional, accessible, and easy to read and talked about your TAS is, shared amongst the team and brought up in your meetings and professional development sessions and all those kind of things. And this is what we said we do. Are we still doing it? How are we doing it? I'll just check the chat. There's a bit more happening here. Okay, lots of hellos, thank yous. That's great. All good. Okay. This is really worth having a chat about too, very briefly, is that when you're developing a training and assessment strategies, there's a number of forces that kind of push it in different directions. And of course, over on the left-hand side there, we have compliance. And, as people that run or work in training and assessment strategies, audits are or performance assessments from the regulator are a stressful experience. They can be. And we want to comply. We don't want to be in a situation where we don't comply. So that's a huge force on it. I know that when we're building out the training and assessment strategy, we're really thinking about how do we tick the box for compliance? How do we make sure that when the auditors or the performance assessors come in, I'm still not used to the new terminology, come in and check what we're doing, that we do comply, that we get the big ticket of approval. So that's obviously going to be a huge force on what goes into your TAS. And I think if we spend too much time on compliance, then we might lose sight of some of these other things, like what the employers and industry want, what the learner needs, and also for many organizations, it's about profit or business objectives as well. But that's not to say that some of these other forces on the other side, like employees, industries, learners, profit, and so on, and they can also be kind of negative forces as well. I'll give you an example, is in many cases, if you ask employers and learners and probably, the owner of the RTO, what they want is they want a TAS that's as short as possible. because the shorter the course is, the less expensive it is to run and the greater the profit is. And for employers, the less amount of time that students have to go and away from their job for training, the better it is for them. That's lost revenue, lost productivity. And learners, well, they just want it done as quickly as possible. So that's not always the case, but that's a common narrative that might come from those other areas. So we've got to watch when we're feeding this information into our TAS. We need to be aware of how these forces can impact what we might plan to do. There's all this push for faster, cheaper, and quicker, and all those kind of things. But also we can look to our employers in the industry, can look to our learners, we can look to our overall business objectives and use them as a force for good as well. So it's just about a bit of awareness there. And the compliance stuff, I'll keep an eye on the time. I won't harp on about compliance stuff too much. So what I've done is I've basically deciphered what the standards for RTO say and put them into, as best I can, plain English. So we'll just go through and talk about how what these tell us about our training and assessment strategies, because we do need to comply. There are other, as we said, there's other forces at play, but we do need to meet the requirements of the standards. So what do they tell us in very plain English? And again, I've simplified these incredibly. So, again, not compliance advice. Go and check the standards for yourself and make sure that you're ticking every box. But this just kind of helps to emphasize what the spirit of the standards. So, plain English, skip on there, plain English compliance for clause 1.1. It's all about what you train and assess needs to meet what's in the unit. How you train and assess, how you train enables the learner to develop the skills and knowledge to be competent. The amount of training that you deliver needs to be sufficient, and that needs to take into consideration the AQF volume of learning indicators. And you can see these we'll give you a link later on to the standards for RTOs. And they you can actually just see the volume of learning table there, which tells you for each level, if you're delivering a qualification, that is, if you're delivering a Cert 3 or a Cert 4, it'll tell you how many hours it would take someone to develop the skills and knowledge to meet the requirements of that qualification. That's if they had, no prior knowledge. So when you look at that table and you go, gee, that says we must deliver this qualification over 1 year or 2 years, and you think, wow, we're actually delivering it in less than that, then you need to make sure that your training and assessment strategy clearly justifies the variation. And a common justification is that you're working with industry experienced professionals. It might be maybe some of your course is really tailored to people who already have experience in that industry. And so therefore the volume of learning for that person or for that cohort is not going to be as extreme as someone who's completely fresh and new to the industry. So it's okay if there is some variation, but you really need to back that up with a really clear description. Gamze has suggested in the chat that's right. However, sometimes the volume of learning is not correct. Sometimes you need more than that time. Okay, you just answered my question. Good. Thanks for your input. I really appreciate your input. If you've got something to suggest or you pick up on something I've missed or you want to add something in, I mean, this is our community is made up of amazing vet professionals, people that run RTOs, people that train and assess on a daily basis. So I'm definitely not one with all the answers. There's many of you in this session today that probably have tons of experience to share. So please do for the benefit of others. Thank you. Clause 1.3 says you need to have enough resources to do what your TAS says. So when you're planning it all out and you think, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, it's going to be amazing, we're going to have a great time, the students have a great time, we're going to learn heaps. You need to think about the resource implications of that. So that means thinking about, do you have enough trainers and assessors? The things like if you're training this many students, are there enough trainers and assessors to meet the needs of that many students? Do you have the educational and support services there to support that that cohort? Do you have the learning resources available for all the units of competency that you said you're going to deliver? And assessment resources. Do you have the facilities and equipment? So we'll mention this a little bit later on in the template, but it's really important to pay attention to the units of competency where they talk about in the assessment requirements section, there's the bit that's called assessment conditions. And in the assessment conditions, that specifies very, very clearly any resource requirements for assessment. And we need to comply with that. So if it says that the learning needs to happen in, for example, let's say hospitality, it needs to happen in a real functioning commercial kitchen, then you need to have access to a real functioning commercial kitchen to deliver and assess that unit. Plain English compliance of clause 1.4 is basically you do what the units of competency in the training package says to do. It's really just a restatement, I think, that one. And plain English compliance clause 2.2 is that you need to systematically monitor what you do to make sure it still reflects the TAS. So it's that thing of, we don't just make the document and publish it and that's it, but we're constantly reviewing and going, are we doing what we said we do? You systematically evaluate the quality of what you do. So that's things like I know they probably don't really look at this too much at the moment, but the quality indicators, student surveys, student feedback. I think it's always good to go beyond just student reactions to course, but actually checking whether students are using what's being learnt, whether it's benefited them in their jobs and employment. And also looking for opportunities to continually improve what you do as well. So that's kind of the general gist of clause 2.2. Just a couple of little notes here from the chat. Yuhua, thank you for that. You've said, do you have a recommended ratio of trainer to learner? I don't, I'm sorry. And I think that's very contextual. If you look at a busy, if you look at the trades center, if they're teaching people to use, power tools and equipment in a trades training center, you are going to want to have a pretty small ratio. So, one trainer to only just a couple of students because of the risk involved with what they're teaching. But, if you had maybe an online course that was teaching basic business skills, then the ratio could be a lot larger for that because the risk isn't involved. The level of supervision isn't as important. So really think about the context of what you're teaching and the implications of that. Cara has suggested a good reminder for me last year was that systematic equals time bound. Thanks for that, Cara. That's a good suggestion there. Some compliance resources have been becoming excessive and overwhelming. Yes, that can feel that way. There's been a suggestion of a 1 to 10 ratio. I think in a lot of cases, that's a pretty good ratio. And hello, Harmanpreet. So what goes into a TAS? Well, there's a few things at play here. I've just looked from the compliance perspective because I wanted to create a template and an approach that might be useful to anyone starting out or anyone just looking to review their approach so that it's compliant with the standards. I know that's a big objective for a lot of you, is just to make sure we're compliant. So if we use that as a starting point, then anything that you add to that is really icing on the cake or is just going to make it even better. So when I say what's in a TAS, basically I've gone and I've looked at what's in the standards for RTOs. I've looked at what the user guide from ASQA says, and I've basically converted that into headings. So this is a bare minimum. You might add more to this. And in fact, I would probably strongly recommend that you add more to this or think about what you're actually teaching, because that's the thing. Vocational education in Australia covers, I just came back from a visit to what they term the super TAFE at Acacia Ridge in Queensland. It's a massive trade centre, and it's over hectares and hectares, and it's in these huge warehouses. And the way they would do their training and assessment strategies is so different to how a small local business college might do it, or a sort of one person operation that goes and runs a first aid course once a month in their local community. So RTOs range from these huge organizations to a one-person operation. So necessarily there's going to be a lot of variance to how you do it. So what's in a TAS at a bare minimum? Well, you need to identify the units of competency you're going to teach. And if it's a qualification, you need to look at the packaging rules and go, okay, we've got these core units and we're going to do these electives. A lot of packaging rules are a little bit more complex than just core and electives. Sometimes they have, you see in some of the engineering units, they have a point system. Sometimes they have groups and streams and specializations. So you need to look at them and make sure you analyze that and pick the units that you can offer. You don't have to offer all of the electives. You just need to comply with the packaging rules. You need to state your entry requirements. So that might mean entry requirements that the units and the qualification tells you must do, but also if your RTO has any specific entry requirements that are beyond what's in the training package. You need to talk about what support you're going to offer your students and what support you can't provide them. We can't always offer every support service under the sun. So if you can't offer a certain service, you need to be really clear about that. And especially that flows on to other parts of compliance, like how you market your courses and everything else. A big part of your strategy should be about your learners and who they are, their characteristics, and that way you can really build the training and assessment strategy around that specific cohort. Your delivery and assessment methods, timing, duration, and sequencing of the course, the amount of training. I mean, that point there, the amount of training might be built into the timing, duration, and sequencing of the course. There's no real rules on how you set that out. What resources you need to actually make all this happen. That includes your human resources, your trainers and assessors, and then industry engagement. So there needs to be a section where you've talked about how you've engaged with industry. So I've got a template and I'll include that in the follow-up resources. I've just gone a bit too far. I just wanted to copy and paste in there the link to that so you can have a look. So this is a second. There we go. So that link there will give you a link to just download a Google Doc version of a very basic bare bones training and assessment strategy that covers these points. And Eric, to your point there about prerequisites, I'd say that comes under the second point there of entry requirements. But yeah, certainly you might have a separate heading for that as well. Nick, you said the guideline is that you must check each and every learner has achieved a skill. That establishes the ratio. The ratio could be one trainer to any number of learners, but will that trainer get around to checking every learner before time runs out? Thanks, Nick. Great point. And Anthony, you mentioned, is that in the recent article with the VR? Yes, yeah, that's right. That was really fun. I really enjoyed that. That just went to feedback. I might have to check the link. Sorry if I've messed that up. I probably should do that afterwards. If the link's wrong, I'll send it to you in the end anyway, and you get a copy of the slide which has the link in it. So fear not, and it's not necessary that you follow along with it right now. So is a training and assessment strategy one document or many? So that's another thing I've seen over the years is I've seen commonly training and assessment strategies being one big document, and I've seen them broken up into multiple ones. So what are some common structures? So a really common one we see is that there's a core training and assessment strategy, which kind of outlines the high level stuff. And then they might have a separate, either in an appendices or as part of separate documents or other management systems in your organization. There's a separate delivery cohort that addresses different, a separate delivery program that addresses different cohorts. So you might have one for how you deliver that course online, one for how you deliver it face-to-face, and one for how you deliver it in the workplace. There might even be subsets of that. So how you deliver it face-to-face for new entrants to the industry, and how you deliver it face-to-face when you've got people that are coming from industry experience. So I've seen that quite a bit. That's a common strategy. And I've seen ones like this where it's a main training and assessment strategy that includes the program, but it has links off to other systems. So, ASCA is not super prescriptive about how you show things like your industry engagement and how you show that you've got the right trainers and assessors. So it might be that to keep your TAS nice and lean and simple and easy to keep up to date, that you actually just link off or refer off to other RTO systems. So it's not uncommon for the RTO to have, some kind of human resources management system that includes like the trainer and assessor matrix, where it's got their skills and knowledge as it meets the units of competency and which trainers are delivering which units. Sometimes these are really nice, fancy online systems, cloud-based systems, which are really great. Maybe you do your industry consultation. We do this as a separate system. We have a separate form and a repository and a system for how we feed that industry consultation into our ongoing continuous improvement. And that's not part of the TAS, but the TAS just mentions it. So it's really up to you how you do it. And sometimes people just have the one document to rule them all, and everything's all in that one document, and it's the one place where everything gets kind of fed into it. And that's totally fine as well. I see that a lot. So that's a good strategy. Just catching up with the chat. Okay, link works. So that's good to know. Thank you. Richard, you've said, is there a government website that outlines the recommended course fees and durations? I don't think so, but that might be something you want to talk to industry about. That's good industry consultation stuff, I think. Is there a rule on how often you need to do industry consultations? Ezra, sorry, you're on your colleague's Zoom platform. Is there a rule on how often you need to do industry consultation? This comes up a bit, and there's no rule on it. I think that, again, it's I hate giving these "it depends" answers, but it really does depend, Ezra. I would say that if you're in the IT industry or any technology industry, any industry that's changing a lot, changing rapidly, then your consultation needs to be pretty frequent. There's a lot happening. Other industries are more slow moving and less dynamic, and that might govern how much consultation you do. There are other factors that play to, like risk, compliance, training package updates. If you've got a new training package, then suddenly there's like the amount of industry consultation we've done over the last 12 months with the new TAE package. I haven't even looked at the register, but there's just so much in there. We're just feeding it and feeding it and feeding it, and so much has gone into the mix. And the development cycle is really rapid at the moment. A lot's happening, a lot's changing because it's such a new course and we're gathering so much intel. So there's a lot of factors there. Great questions, by the way. Thank you. Janine, do I have a template for industry consultation? I do. That might be a point for a future session, Janine, I think. We do have a really good template that we use, and probably like everything else, we'll just chuck it up there and give it out for people to use if they like. Is there a guideline to maximum limit of face-to-face learners for the SIT course? I don't know, sorry. I'm guessing that's from the service industry, tourism and hospitality training package. I don't know, that's not my area. I'm sorry, Benedict. There's no control over nominal hours of a course. Many RTOs choose more hours to be done at home and less face-to-face. Good point, Eric. Thank you. Does a TAS need to be updated upon validation or moderation activities? Thanks, Dania. That's a good question. Does it need to be? No. Should it be? Probably. I think if anything I think it depends on what the outcome of the validation and moderation is. If your validation says we've identified, a big thing that's not really working in our current strategy, we need to fix it, then that would probably mean you need to feed that into the TAS and update it. But if your validation comes back all good and everything's fine, it's not often that we kind of get everything right, but yeah, I mean, sometimes your validation and moderation is really just about confirming what you're doing is on the right track. So there probably won't be an update to that. I think that's a really good question, Dania. Thanks for that. I don't really have any more answers for anyone who's got suggestions there on questions on how many trainers to student ratio. I really think this is about quality and meeting the outcomes for students. If there's not enough trainers that the students aren't getting a good experience and they're not learning the skills and knowledge they need, then there's probably a need to have more trainers, to fix that ratio a bit. But I don't know. I think that every industry is so different, so I don't really have any more answers for that question. I'm sorry. So how do you develop TAS? There's a few answers to this, and again, there's a few models we can look at. And then I'll share with you how we do it, which is probably a little bit more chaotic than what the instructional design models would suggest. Firstly, I think the people putting together a TAS is, while the name might suggest it's a bit of a business document and it's a strategic document, it's an educational plan. So we need to go back to our TAE 101 stuff and start to think about how people learn. If that's not a major consideration in your training and assessment strategy, then there's probably something amiss. So that'll mean thinking about all the stuff that you probably learned when you first started teaching about how adults learn, some of the theories about how adults learn, things like scaffolding. So when learners you need to think about how your cohort, your group of students develop their skills and how much support you put in place for them. So at the beginning stages of learning something new, when they're developing a new skill, students need lots of guidance and lots of support. They need lots of assistance, lots of direction, someone who's really explicitly showing them how to do the thing. And that, again, might feed into some of your questions about trainer ratios and things like that. But you need to think about the level of support a student needs to develop the skills, what activities the student does. So not just about the teaching techniques, but the students' learning activities, the things they do to develop that knowledge and to develop those skills. You think about what opportunities they have for practice. So it's not just about the teaching, but when learners are building their skills and knowledge, what things are they doing to actually gain mastery, to develop their competence? And it's also worth looking into instructional design principles. I'll mention a few of these on the next slide. But again, I know I've mentioned this book quite a few times, but if you're really thinking about that question of how do people learn, a good first book on designing for how people learn is, its title is Design for How People Learn by Julie Dirksen. It's a really good instructional design 101 book. Probably the most commonly cited model for instructional design is called ADDIE, ADDIE, and the structure of that is basically analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. So that means analyzing all the needs of the learners, all that stuff that we had on the influences page earlier on, all the inputs, designing your course, so the structure and what the students are going to learn first, what they're going to learn next, and so on. Then you develop all your materials and your lesson plans and all the assessment tools. You implement them, and then you evaluate. Did it work? What worked well? What needs to be improved? That's all your consultation, your validation, your student feedback. And you can see the arrow then feeds back to analyze again, and then you start the cycle. There's some limitations to this. It's a very rigid design, and it suggests that you basically get everything right before you implement it, and that can be a challenge. There's other models like the Dick and Carey model and the SAM model. I just recommend Googling those. There's so many resources available out there to look at. And there's even further models than that, but I'd say these are the more common ones that are used. That being said, you can kind of look at these models for developing a training and assessment strategy and adapt them. And so I'll give you an example of how we typically do ours. This is probably not, I probably should have put the title there of how to make a TAS, but this is how we do ours, is we basically get all this intelligence, and a lot of it is based on previous experience. I'd say from me, I'm really fresh off and probably still very much involved in our recent experiences of developing the new TAE course. And so, you know, we've got a ton of experience after 12 or so years of delivering that already that we can feed into this. So there's a huge amount of experience there that just goes, that informs us of what worked well in the past and what didn't work well. So no doubt when you're developing a TAS, you'll have this as well. You'll have a wealth of experience from which you can draw on of what worked well for you and your students and what didn't. But also add to that, you know, go and talk to industry. Those are the people that employ your graduates, so they're a really important stakeholder. Talk to students or people that represent the type of people that you're going to be training, and even graduates of past courses. Look at previous student feedback and previous employer feedback. And of course, we need to analyze the actual training package itself, the qualification, what units go into it, the requirements, and so on. So we get all of that in. This is probably a silly analogy, but it probably does kind of represent the chaos that is in our training and assessment strategies sometimes. I'm really honest that we're not perfect in how we're doing this. So I think that's really important to underscore that it's very hard to have a perfect TAS, and what works well for one RTO and gets the squeaky clean tick of compliance from ASQA may be found grossly non-compliant at another training organization. So none of us are perfect, but this is what's worked for us, and we've had really great experiences through audits over the years, and really great feedback along the way as well. So it goes into the blender. We blend it all up, and then I'd say we kind of go into part of the ADDI model, where it's an iterative develop, implement, and evaluate model. And it's really just, we make a change, we develop, we implement it. Did it work? What further improvements need to be made? So it's simple, but it works for us. And I think this fits in nicely with the continuous, you know, there's an undertone of continuous improvement throughout the compliance standards. So that iterative model really works. And you'll see if you go and dive into some of those instructional design models, you'll see that iterative approach is used quite a lot. And absolutely, yes, we'll get a copy of the slides and the chat transcript too. Yeah, that's great. I'll have a look. We'll see how we do that to preserve the privacy of the participants, but I'll see if I can just kind of grab the pertinent questions. Cara said, I've seen different TAS for different cohorts, people with experience versus job seekers, and then also one singular TAS with justifications for the different types of learners. So one TAS, but multiple appendices. Thanks for that, Cara, that's great. I know you've developed a few TASs in your time, so I appreciate your input. ADDI is a bit like a risk model. Thanks, Dania. Janine, what model do we use? That's it there. ADDI is a good model. And Mitch is chatting to Charles about, do you have to prepare separate TASs for the same unit of competency? Yeah, there's a lot of these kind of suggestions on, a lot of these questions about do we have to? And there's very little of do we have to when it comes to training and assessment strategies. And that's good and bad. It's good because it gives us lots of freedom to do things in different ways. And it accounts for the different sized RTOs and different types of RTOs that are out there, which is good. But it also means that many of us, Charles, are left with questions of, you know, do I have to do it this way? And I know it's really can be stressful when it comes to audit time, that we just want someone to, you know, you're telling me I'm non-compliant, so what do I have to do to be compliant? So I know these kinds of questions come from that place. So there is no, do you have to on this one? Do you have to prepare separate TASs for the same unit of competency? So like Cara's mentioned, and I mentioned earlier too, sometimes it's all in the one document. Sometimes it's one core document and then multiple programs. Sometimes it's multiple TASs. So there's a few different approaches there. Thanks for your suggestion. All right. Yep, I agree with you, Janine. Customizing training materials creates a huge amount of work. Absolutely. Really great input. Thank you so much for all your suggestions, questions, and input in the chat. So now to some real world experience. And when I do these sessions, I always like to go out and just talk to people and find out what they've done. And you might have seen in the newsletter, I asked if there's anyone who would like to share their experiences in training and assessment strategies, which I did. And I got some amazing input and suggestions, and also from some other professionals as well who do compliance consulting, basically help RTOs pass audits and get courses on scope and that kind of thing. So I just thought I'd make a little suite as part of this session on real world experience. So all of these anecdotes here are basically either quotes or just for the sake of brevity, I've paraphrased them a little bit. And I've also just anonymized them as well, because I think sometimes, and understandably, people can be a little bit nervous about, you know, what they kind of put out there into the real world, especially when it comes to compliance. So I just for the sake of simplicity, I've kept all this anonymous, and then I've just got an acknowledgement page at the end just to thank everybody who did share their experience so thoughtfully with me. I really appreciate it. So one of the anecdotes I got was I was involved in an audit last year. A TAS I'd written was pulled apart by the performance assessors, by ASQA, and then they redid it, and then the redo was pulled apart again. And the big issues found were that the TAS didn't have enough, didn't detail the amount of training per unit for online courses. They wanted to know what qualified the people in the industry consultation and the industry engagements to make their comments. They wanted to know, how do we use that consultation to change and alter the course? We didn't have the details acknowledging that self-paced learning can take longer, and they wanted links to lesson plans. So yeah, so there are, I think some of these, you know, with this kind of stuff with audit, it's, you know, you do hear stories sometimes of performance assessments, auditors that maybe, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say it, but you know what I mean? They come in with perhaps their own conceptions that maybe go beyond what the standards say, and that can cause trouble. That can cause problems. Another piece of experience that was shared with me, I wanted to share input from our recent ASQA audit finalised in September 2022. The two biggest questions I remember us needing to explicitly address and beef up in the TAS was, how are students given the opportunity to practice their skills before assessment? That's a big common theme in a lot of the comments and discussions that I've had, is there's a big focus on assessment and how the course is delivered, but do students actually get the opportunity to practice their skills before they're assessed? How will we assure ourselves that students will have appropriate access to the right tools and equipment in the workplace or at home? Some more real world experience. Someone suggested, someone from LinkedIn said, the primary purpose of a TAS is to ensure that no matter who delivers the training or assessments, that it's consistent and the student receives the same quality of training. Remember, you may not be the one talking to it at audit, so you need to be as specific as possible in how the course is structured and why. I think that's a really good point. If you're developing a TAS, remembering that you may not be the one that's actually standing by that document in audit and trying to explain how you're doing all those things. So make it really clear. How did they implement industry recommendations? If they didn't implement an industry recommendation, why didn't they? So what's the justification for that? So that was from a different person to that first slide. So that's an industry point. So an interesting point there. How did they, you know, if they didn't actually take on board something from industry, why didn't they do that? How was the AOT and VOL calculated? That's the amount of training and volume of learning. So what's the justification for that? Is that suitable for the cohort of learners you've selected? What learning methods are used and why? What assessment methods are used and why? How is the simulated environment set up to reflect industry conditions? And is the trainer to student ratio reasonable? There's been a lot of discussion in the chat on that one. Maybe that's I feel like every time we run these sessions, I get inspired for a topic for another session. It's great. And And someone said in their providers need to include a detailed course program that shows the sequence of learning and assessment activities and how learners will receive adequate training prior to their assessment. Someone else suggested a TAS is a living document. So I think that's really just saying that it needs to be updated frequently so that it matches what's happening out there on the ground. If you have different cohorts for the same course, then you'd have more than one TAS. Many people think of a TAS as something to meet compliance requirements rather than a document to be used. You've got to follow through on what your TAS says. All right, we're going to wrap this up, and I've got some really great links to resources here. So there's actually here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 5 links to other people's training and assessment strategy templates. And I think they're all better than the one I've given you. So I would say the one I've given you is a really generic starting point that you might like to just use and adapt. If you wanted to really make it your own, then probably use ours. But if you wanted to see how something, a lot more detailed is used, then these are all in the public domain. I basically Googled them, to be honest with you. TAS TAFE. So if you want to see how TAFE in Tasmania do their, isn't that funny? TAS TAFE, TAS template is a bit of a mouthful. You want to see how they do their TASs? There's too much TAS going on. There's a link to that one. There's a link to RMIT's TAS, so another big institute. Joe Newbury, who's a compliance consultant, he puts out a lot of really great resources, a really nice fella. And he's got his TAS template that's up for anyone to use. And it looks like he's released it under the Creative Commons license too. So that means, I guess, with acknowledgement, you can use and adapt it. You might need to check with him if you do use it. And the Western Australia Training and Accreditation Council, they've got some really awesome resources available. They do some really great stuff for their RTOs over there in WA. They have a fact sheet and it includes a template. So there'll be a link to that provided as well. Actually, I'll just quickly chuck it in the chat now. Just give me a moment. So you've got immediate links to these. Okay, there we go. There's the links to all those. If you haven't seen VocEd Plus, that's basically run by NCB. It's a really good resource of so much stuff dating back to quite a while back, early in our Australia's vet system. And so you'll see down the bottom there, I've got the original anti-LAS kit. So they used to be commonly called a learning and assessment strategy, not a training and assessment strategy. I've actually still got the original bright orange publication from this on my bookshelf. They released the old Australian National Training Authority released a LAS kit. And it was basically where all this stuff started. If you want, the idea was in those original 2002 version of the Australian Quality Training Framework, they started using that terminology, learning and assessment strategy. And so the national authority on VET at the time released this really detailed how-to kit and resource guide, and it's still available on the VocEd Plus website. So there's links to that there. And so you can actually see where all this started. And it's really remarkable that after over 20 years, that document's 20 years old, a lot of training and assessment strategies still look very much like they used to back then. So that's interesting. My acknowledgements to the people who shared their, in the suggestions earlier: Sandy Welton, Joe Newbury, Phil Bevan, Amanda Asper, Cara, and Candice McFarlane. Thank you so much for your input. I really appreciate what you've shared with me to make this session more relevant. So that's it for today. I really thank you so much for your participation. It means a lot. As always, we'll send out the certificates to all participants. We generate the certificates based on the attendance from Zoom. So if there's a problem or it comes out with a weird name, it's because you probably used your colleague's Zoom account to log in. Please let us know in the follow-up if your certificate doesn't look right, and we can fix it up for you. And yeah, thank you again. I really appreciate your attendance and you sharing your time and suggestions with me. And it's been a really great session, and I'm very much looking forward to the next one. Have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.